Ethan Miller never imagined he would take his own parents to court. But after years of unexplained withdrawals from his bank account, he was certain of one thing: he was being used. Armed with financial records and a burning sense of betrayal, he was ready to expose the truth. But the real truth was something far more shocking. As the case unfolds, buried secrets rise to the surface. A hidden bank account, a sister he never knew existed, a violent past his parents had desperately tried to keep buried, and a man who had been watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. This isn't just a story about money. It's a story about deception, sacrifice, and a family pushed to the brink. And when the past finally catches up, Ethan will have to fight for more than just the truth. He'll have to fight to protect the people he never knew he needed. What really happened? And who is the real threat? Find out now as we dive into this gripping, unpredictable story. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story filled with mystery, drama, and unexpected twists. The courtroom was filled with whispers, a tension so thick it felt like a storm was brewing. Ethan Miller sat at the plaintiff's table, his jaw clenched, his fingers tapping against the polished wooden surface. Across from him, his parents, Henry and Margaret Miller, looked pale but defiant. "Mr. Miller," Judge Anderson's deep voice echoed in the courtroom, silencing the murmurs. "You are accusing your parents of financial exploitation. Are you certain you wish to proceed with this case?" Ethan took a deep breath. His lawyer, Daniel Carter, adjusted his tie and nodded at him. "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan replied, his voice steady but cold. "I have sufficient evidence to prove that my parents have systematically drained my accounts for their own benefit." Margaret gasped, covering her mouth, while Henry shook his head in disbelief. The prosecution presented the first piece of evidence: a series of bank transactions. Thousands of dollars transferred from Ethan's account to his parents. "This," Daniel declared, holding up a printed record, "shows consistent withdrawals over the past 5 years, all made by the defendants under the pretense of family expenses. My client never consented to these transactions." Margaret finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Ethan, how could you do this? We are your parents. Everything we did was for you." Ethan's heart twisted, but his resolve hardened. "Then prove it," he challenged. Just as the judge prepared to move forward, the courtroom doors swung open. A woman in a black suit stepped in, carrying a sealed folder. "Your Honor," she said firmly, handing a document to the bailiff, "I have information that may change the course of this trial." Ethan narrowed his eyes. He had never seen this woman before. "Who are you?" he demanded. "My name is Olivia Hayes. I am a lawyer representing an anonymous party." The room fell into silence as the judge opened the folder. His expression darkened. He looked up at Henry and Margaret. "Would you care to explain this?" he asked, his voice heavy with something between curiosity and warning. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Henry clenched his fists. Olivia turned to Ethan. "There is something you don't know," she said. "Something that will change everything you think about this case." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What the hell are you talking about?" Olivia took a deep breath. "You have a sister, Ethan, and your parents have spent everything they had to protect her." The courtroom exploded into gasps and whispers. Ethan froze, his mind spinning. "A sister," he whispered, his throat dry. Olivia nodded. "Her name is Rebecca, and she is about to change everything you believe about your family." The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court. But for Ethan, order no longer existed. His world had just been shattered. Ethan's heart pounded as Olivia Hayes' words echoed through the courtroom. "You have a sister, Ethan?" He gripped the edge of the table, his breath shallow. His parents sat across from him, their faces pale, their eyes filled with something between guilt and sorrow. The courtroom, moments ago filled with tension over financial accusations, was now consumed by the shocking revelation. Judge Anderson leaned forward, his gaze shifting between the defendants and the new witness. "Miss Hayes, do you have proof of this claim?" Olivia nodded, gesturing to the bailiff, who handed the sealed file to the judge. Ethan's lawyer, Daniel, leaned in, whispering, "We need to see that document." The judge skimmed the papers, his brow furrowing. Then he turned to Henry and Margaret Miller. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, is this true? Do you have another child?" Margaret sniffled, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Henry exhaled deeply, as if carrying a weight too heavy to bear. "Yes, Your Honor," he admitted. "We do." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Ethan felt the floor beneath him shift. A sister. A secret kept from him his entire life. He shot up from his seat. "And when were you planning on telling me?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "Or were you just going to let me sue you in court without ever knowing the truth?" Margaret sobbed, but Henry straightened his shoulders. "We wanted to tell you, Ethan," he said. "But we were afraid." "Afraid of what?" Ethan demanded. Olivia Hayes cleared her throat. "If I may," she said, stepping forward. "I was hired to represent Rebecca Miller's interests in this case. She's 19 years old, currently in college. And up until now, she had no idea about this trial." Ethan blinked. "Wait. She doesn't even know I exist." "She knows of you," Olivia corrected, "but she was never told the full story. Your parents kept you apart to protect her." A bitter laugh escaped Ethan's lips. "Protect her from what?" "Me." Margaret finally spoke, her voice hoarse from crying. "No, Ethan. From the truth. From what we had to do to keep both of you safe." Ethan clenched his fists. "And what exactly did you have to do?" Henry and Margaret exchanged glances before Henry nodded grimly. "We had to choose," he said, "between telling you everything and making sure Rebecca had a future. We had to make sacrifices." Daniel leaned toward Ethan. "We need to dig into this," he whispered. "There's more they aren't saying." Judge Anderson tapped his gavel lightly. "Given the nature of these revelations, I'm granting a recess. We will reconvene in 1 hour. Court dismissed." The courtroom erupted into noise as the judge exited. Ethan turned to Olivia, his eyes burning with unanswered questions. "Where is she?" he asked. "Rebecca?" Olivia hesitated. "She's outside. She came here today, thinking she was just meeting her parents for lunch. She had no idea she was about to walk into a lawsuit." Ethan let out a slow breath. His anger was still raw, but curiosity gnawed at him. He had a sister, a stranger connected to him by blood, and she had been kept from him his entire life. "Take me to her," he said. Olivia nodded. "Follow me." As Ethan stepped out of the courtroom, the weight of the case, the accusations, the betrayal, the money momentarily faded. For the first time in his life, he was about to meet his sister, and nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan followed Olivia down the long, marble-floored corridor of the courthouse. His mind was a storm of emotions: anger, confusion, curiosity. A sister. For 27 years, he had believed he was an only child. Now, in the middle of a lawsuit against his own parents, he was being told otherwise. They turned a corner near the courthouse waiting area, and there she was. Rebecca Miller. She was sitting on a bench, her fingers nervously gripping the strap of her purse. She had dark auburn hair, pulled into a loose ponytail, and sharp green eyes so much like their mother's. When she saw Ethan approaching, she stood, hesitating before taking a step forward. "Ethan?" Her voice was soft, uncertain. Ethan stopped a few feet away, studying her. She looked so familiar, yet so foreign at the same time. "Yeah," he said. "That's me." Silence stretched between them. Olivia glanced between the two, then cleared her throat. "I'll give you two some time." She stepped back, leaving them alone. Rebecca took a deep breath. I don't know what to say." Ethan scoffed, shoving his hands into his pockets. "That makes two of us." Her expression faltered. "I swear, I had no idea about any of this. I didn't even know you were suing Mom and Dad until I walked in today." Ethan narrowed his eyes. And you expect me to believe that? Rebecca frowned. Why would I lie? I thought I was just meeting them for lunch. Next thing I know, Olivia's telling me I have a brother, and our parents are in court over money. She exhaled sharply. It's insane. Ethan studied her, trying to read her face. There was no deceit in her expression, just shock. Maybe she really had been kept in the dark, just like he had. You didn't know about me, Ethan said slowly, but they knew about you. They spent my money on you. Rebecca's eyes widened. Wait, what? They took thousands from me. Ethan continued, voice bitter. I thought they were using it for themselves, but now I find out they were funding your life instead. Rebecca shook her head. No, that can't be right. They've never given me extra money. I mean, they help with my college tuition, but I thought that was from their savings. Ethan let out a dry laugh. Their savings? They barely had any. Everything they spent on you came from me. Rebecca's lips parted in disbelief. I don't know what to say. Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. This wasn't her fault. She was just as blindsided as he was. Look, he said, his voice softer now. I don't blame you, but I need to know the truth. And if our parents won't give it to me, maybe you can. Rebecca nodded hesitantly. I want the truth too, Ethan exhaled. Then, let's find out together. As they stood in the courthouse hallway, one thing became clear: this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about uncovering the secrets that had kept them apart. Ethan and Rebecca sat across from each other at a small table inside the courthouse's conference room. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a cold glow on the tension between them. Olivia Hayes stood by the door, arms crossed, watching the two siblings like a referee before a match. Ethan leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the polished surface of the table. I need to understand something, he said. If they weren't giving you extra money, then where the hell did all of it go? Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. I don't know, she admitted. I always thought they had some savings tucked away. They never told me anything about you, and they never said a word about where my tuition money was coming from. Ethan's jaw tightened. And you never questioned it? Rebecca hesitated, looking guilty. I did once. A couple of years ago, when I asked Mom how she could afford my tuition when Dad's business wasn't doing well. She just said, don't worry about it. She exhaled sharply. I figured they took out a loan. Ethan shook his head. No loan. No savings. Just me. Silence filled the room. Olivia cleared her throat. There's another way to get answers, she said. Your parents might not be talking, but there are financial records that don't lie. We can subpoena their bank statements, property transactions, even loan records if necessary. Ethan nodded. Do it. Rebecca looked unsure. Is that really necessary? Ethan shot her a sharp look. Are you serious? They've been lying to both of us for years. I don't trust a single thing they say anymore. I need the truth, and I'll get it with or without them. Rebecca swallowed hard, but didn't argue. She could see the determination in Ethan's eyes, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. A knock at the door interrupted them. A court clerk stepped inside, handing Olivia a folder. These were just processed, he said. Judge Anderson approved the request for financial records. Ethan's pulse quickened as Olivia flipped through the documents. She frowned. This is unexpected. What? Ethan asked impatiently. Olivia laid the papers flat on the table. Your parents sold their old house 5 years ago. Ethan frowned. I knew that. They downsized to a smaller place. So what? Olivia tapped a line on the document. They sold it for significantly more than the market value at the time. Almost double. And then she turned the page. They funneled the money into a private account. Rebecca blinked. A private account? In whose name? Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. It wasn't in their names, she said. It was in yours, Ethan. Ethan stiffened. What? Rebecca's eyes widened. Wait, you mean they weren't stealing from Ethan? They were saving for him? Ethan's mind reeled. He had spent months, convinced his parents had drained him dry. But now, the evidence suggested something else entirely. They had been putting money aside for him? Why? This doesn't make sense, Ethan muttered. If that account existed, why didn't they tell me? Olivia continued flipping through the documents, then stopped. She paled slightly. What is it? Ethan demanded. Olivia looked up, her voice cautious. Ethan, someone else has been withdrawing money from this account. Ethan's blood ran cold. Who? Olivia hesitated. Ryan Carter. The air in the room shifted. Rebecca looked between them, confused. Who's Ryan Carter? Ethan's hands clenched into fists. My best friend. His voice was tight, controlled. Or at least that's what I thought. The realization hit like a freight train. His parents weren't the ones stealing from him. It was someone much closer. Someone he trusted. And now he was going to find out why. Ethan's mind reeled as Olivia's words settled in. Ryan Carter. The name echoed like a hammer striking an anvil. His best friend, the person he had trusted more than anyone, had been secretly withdrawing money from the private account his parents had set up for him. Ethan shot up from his chair, his heart pounding. This has to be a mistake. His voice was sharp, but deep down, a terrible suspicion had already begun to take root. Olivia calmly slid the bank statement across the table. The withdrawals started almost 4 years ago. At first, they were small, just a few hundred here and there. But in the last year, the amounts increased dramatically. The most recent transaction? $20,000. Taken out just 3 months ago. Rebecca sucked in a breath. Oh my God! Ethan's fingers curled into fists. He told me he was struggling with money, he muttered. That his startup was failing. I loaned him money when he asked, but I never thought. He broke off, his pulse hammering. Rebecca hesitated. Are you sure he didn't just, I don't know, borrow it and plan to give it back? Ethan let out a bitter laugh. Borrow it? Without telling me? Without asking? His jaw tightened. That's not borrowing. That's stealing. Olivia leaned forward. The real question is, how did he access this account in the first place? She flipped through another document. The account was set up under your name, Ethan, but there were 2 authorized users. Your parents. She paused, then looked up. And Ryan Carter. Ethan felt like he had been punched in the gut. No, he said, shaking his head. That's impossible. My parents wouldn't. And then, suddenly, the pieces clicked together. His parents had probably trusted Ryan. After all, he had been Ethan's best friend since college. If Ryan had convinced them he was helping manage Ethan's finances, they might have believed him. Or worse, maybe they had no idea what he was doing. Ethan clenched his jaw. I need to talk to him. Now. Olivia nodded. I'll have someone track him down. But Ethan had a better idea. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Ryan's name. His fingers hovered over the call button, but he hesitated. If Ryan had been lying for years, would he pick up now? Only one way to find out. He hit dial. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then Ethan. Ryan's voice was casual, like nothing was wrong. What's up, man? Ethan forced himself to stay calm. We need to talk. In person. Ryan hesitated. Everything okay? Yeah, Ethan lied. Just some business stuff I want to go over with you. A pause. Then Ryan chuckled. You're finally taking my advice, huh? All right. Where do you want to meet? Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. Meet me at the courthouse, he said, keeping his voice neutral. I'll text you the details. Ryan laughed again. Damn, man, you sure know how to pick a meeting spot. All right, see you soon. The call ended. Ethan exhaled slowly, then turned to Olivia and Rebecca. He's coming. Rebecca looked uneasy. Are you sure this is a good idea? Ethan's expression was hard as stone. I need to hear the truth. From him. He glanced toward the courtroom doors. The very place where he had accused his parents of betrayal was about to become the scene of an even greater revelation. And this time, he wasn't going to let anyone deceive him again. Ethan paced in the courthouse lobby, his hands clenched into fists. The marble floor beneath him gleamed under the artificial lights, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing, his pulse hammering in his ears. Ryan was on his way. Rebecca sat nearby, her fingers nervously tapping against the armrest of her chair. Olivia stood by the entrance, arms crossed, keeping a watchful eye on the doors. "You sure you want to do this here?" Rebecca asked hesitantly. "I mean, calling him to the courthouse? What if he realizes something's off?" Ethan shot her a sharp look. "Good. Let him feel the pressure. If he's been lying to me for years, he deserves to squirm." Rebecca bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable, but she didn't argue. A few minutes later, the doors swung open. Ryan Carter walked in, his confident stride making it seem like he had nothing to hide. He was dressed casually, dark jeans, a button-down shirt, and a leather watch Ethan had given him years ago. Seeing it now made Ethan's stomach twist. "Ethan," Ryan grinned, spreading his arms. "Man, I gotta say, you picked one hell of a spot for a meeting. What's going on?" Ethan didn't return the smile. He simply crossed his arms. "We need to talk." Ryan's grin faltered slightly. His eyes flickered to Rebecca and Olivia. What's with the audience?" Ethan motioned to a nearby private room. "Let's go inside." Ryan hesitated for a moment, but then shrugged. "All right, boss man. Lead the way." Once inside, Ethan shut the door and turned to face him. Olivia stood near the back, her presence silent but firm. Rebecca remained outside, sensing this was something Ethan needed to handle himself. Ryan sat down casually. "All right, so what's up?" Ethan didn't sit. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the bank records. He tossed them onto the table in front of Ryan. Ryan glanced down, his smile faltering even more. "What's this?" Ethan's voice was cold. "You tell me." Ryan hesitated, then picked up the papers. As his eyes scanned the records, Ethan saw at the flicker of recognition, the slight tensing of his jaw. It was subtle, but it was there. "Look, man," Ryan said, setting the papers down. "I don't know what you think this is, but cut the crap," Ethan snapped. His voice echoed in the small room. "I know. You've been withdrawing money from my account. The account my parents set up for me." Ryan blinked. "Wait, what? Your parents set up an account for you?" Ethan's fists clenched. "Don't play dumb, Ryan. You were an authorized user. You had access." Ryan leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "I swear, Ethan, I didn't know. Your parents told me." He stopped himself abruptly. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Told you what?" Ryan exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "They told me it was a fund for emergencies. That if you ever needed money, but were too stubborn to ask, I could take care of it for you." Ethan let out a sharp laugh. "And you just decided you were the emergency?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "No, he hesitated. His gaze darted toward Olivia, who was watching him carefully. "Look, I did take money, okay? But it wasn't for me." Ethan folded his arms. "Then who was it for?" Ryan hesitated again. And that was when Ethan knew. "Rebecca," Ethan whispered. Ryan's expression gave him away. He swallowed hard, confirming what Ethan had just realized. Ryan had been taking money for Rebecca. The pieces started fitting together. Ryan knew about her long before Ethan did. His parents must have told him. And somehow, Ryan had decided it was his responsibility to make sure she was okay without ever telling Ethan the truth. Ethan shook his head. "You knew. This whole time you knew about her." Ryan sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Yeah," he admitted. "I knew." Ethan felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. His best friend had betrayed him. His parents had lied to him. His sister had been kept a secret from him. And now, standing in the courthouse, where he had once thought he was the victim, Ethan realized something. The truth was more complicated than he ever imagined. Ethan stared at Ryan, his pulse pounding. The air in the courthouse conference room felt heavier, pressing down on him with the weight of everything he had just learned. "You knew," Ethan repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "You knew about Rebecca this whole time, and you never told me?" Ryan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I knew," he admitted, "but it wasn't my secret to tell, Ethan." Ethan let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Not your secret? You took my money, Ryan. You used me. And now you're standing here acting like you were protecting me?" His fists clenched. "I don't buy it." Ryan's jaw tightened. "I never wanted to lie to you. But your parents, they made me promise. They said they'd tell you when the time was right." Ethan scoffed. "And when exactly was that? Before or after I dragged them to court?" Ryan looked down, guilt flickering across his face. "I don't know, man. I kept waiting for them to say something. But when I realized they wouldn't, he sighed. I just did what I thought was right." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Right? Right would have been telling me the truth. Instead, you stole from me." Ryan's expression hardened. "I wasn't stealing from you, Ethan. I was helping Rebecca." Ethan shook his head. "I don't care how you spin it. You went behind my back." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "You need to start talking. Now. What exactly did my parents tell you?" Ryan hesitated, glancing at Olivia, who had remained silent through the exchange, her sharp eyes analyzing everything. Finally, he exhaled. "They told me about Rebecca a few years ago. I was over at their house one night, and they sat me down. Said they had a daughter, your sister. They told me about how they had to keep her a secret because of everything that happened with her biological father." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean? What happened with him?" Ryan hesitated again, then said carefully, "I think that's something you should ask your parents yourself." Ethan's patience snapped. "No more games, Ryan. I deserve the truth." Ryan flinched, but held Ethan's gaze. "All I know is that your parents were afraid of what would happen if people found out about Rebecca too soon. I didn't ask for details. I just knew they were trying to protect her." Ethan exhaled slowly, his anger still simmering, but now mixed with unease. He had spent months believing his parents had betrayed him. But now the story was shifting. The money, the secrecy, the lies, it wasn't about greed. It was about something deeper. A threat. Olivia finally spoke. "Ethan, if what Ryan is saying is true, we need to go back to the legal case." She turned to Ryan. "You said Ethan's parents made you promise to keep Rebecca a secret. Did they ever mention a legal reason? Restraining orders? Custody battles?" Ryan frowned, thinking. "They never said much, but I remember one thing. They once mentioned court documents." Ethan stiffened. "What kind of court documents?" Ryan shook his head. "I don't know, but your dad told me, if the truth gets out too soon, we could lose everything." Ethan's blood ran cold. For months, he had thought this case was about money. But now, standing in the courthouse, where he had tried to expose his parents, he realized something chilling. There was another secret buried beneath it all. And if what Ryan was saying was true, it was far bigger than he had ever imagined. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. If the truth gets out too soon, we could lose everything. His father's words, repeated by Ryan, rattled in his mind. This was no longer just about money. There was something hidden, something his parents were terrified of. And it had to be in the court records. Olivia, standing with her arms crossed, had the same thought. "We need to pull any legal documents related to your family. Restraining orders, custody agreements, sealed case files, anything that might explain what your parents were so afraid of." Ethan nodded. "How fast can we get them?" "I'll make some calls," Olivia said, already reaching for her phone. "If they exist, I'll find them." As she stepped outside to handle the request, Ethan turned back to Ryan, his jaw tight. "You should have told me." Ryan sighed. "I know, but I thought I was protecting you." Ethan's voice was sharp. That wasn't your call to make. Ryan looked down. I get it. Ethan took a deep breath, pushing aside the betrayal for now. You said my parents were afraid of him. Rebecca's biological father. What do you know about him? Ryan hesitated. Not much. Just that he wasn't a good guy. Your dad once told me, the less you know about him, the safer you'll be. That was enough for me to back off. Ethan clenched his fists. His father had always been protective, but this was different. There was fear in those words. And Ethan needed to know why. A few minutes later, Olivia returned, a file in hand. Got something, she said. Ethan snatched it from her and flipped it open. His breath caught in his throat. Court of California Case No. 09-1327 Petitioner. Margaret Miller Respondent. Jacob Wells filed. October 3, 2009 Subject. Petition for sole custody and emergency protective order. Ethan's stomach twisted. Who the hell is Jacob Wells? Rebecca's father. The name meant nothing to Ethan, but Olivia's face darkened as she scanned the document. This isn't just a custody battle. Your mother filed for sole custody and a restraining order. She flipped to another page. There's a record of a domestic violence complaint. Ethan's throat tightened. He hurt her? Olivia nodded. According to this, Jacob Wells was arrested in 2009 for assault. Your mother's statement describes repeated incidents of violence, threats, and stalking. The court granted an emergency protective order. Ethan's hands gripped the edges of the file so tightly they trembled. His mother had never told him any of this. Olivia continued reading. A year later, she was granted full custody of Rebecca. But Wells contested it. He tried to fight for visitation rights in court. She flipped another page. The judge denied it, stated that Wells had a history of violent behavior and was considered a danger to both Margaret and Rebecca. Ethan's mind raced. His mother had been running from this man for years, hiding Rebecca, hiding the truth. And somewhere along the way, his parents had pulled Ryan into it, trusting him enough to help keep their secret. Rebecca, who had been silent until now, spoke softly. So that's why they never told Ethan about me. Ethan looked at her. She wasn't crying, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Olivia closed the file. If Jacob Wells is still out there, your parents might still be afraid of him. Ethan's jaw set. Then it's time we found out where he is. Because if this man was still a threat, Ethan wasn't just going to uncover the truth, he was going to stop him. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the court documents in his hands. The name Jacob Wells burned into his mind like a brand. A man he had never met. A man who had haunted his mother and sister for years. And a man who might still be out there. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Do you think she hesitated, wrapping her arms around herself. Do you think he knows about me? Ethan clenched his jaw. If he's been looking, he might. But if Mom and Dad went to this much trouble to keep him away, I doubt they left any loose ends. Olivia exhaled. We need to be sure. She pulled out her phone and began typing. I'll check public records, see if he's had any recent legal trouble. Restraining orders, arrests, property records, anything that tells us where he is. Ryan, who had been silent for the past few minutes, spoke up. If this guy is dangerous, we shouldn't just be digging for information. We should be preparing for the worst. Ethan shot him a glare. I am prepared. Ryan held up his hands. I get it, man. You're pissed at me. But this isn't about me. It's about him. And if your parents were scared enough to keep Rebecca a secret for 19 years, we should take this seriously. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. You're right. The words tasted bitter, but he meant them. We don't know what we're dealing with yet. A moment later, Olivia's phone beeped. She frowned at the screen. Got something? Everyone leaned in. Jacob Wells, Olivia read. Released from Folsom State Prison 2 years ago. Rebecca inhaled sharply. Prison? Ethan's stomach twisted. For what? Olivia scrolled. Aggravated assault. He was convicted in 2011, sentenced to 10 years, and served 9 before getting out on parole. She paused. Looks like he violated his parole conditions twice, but the charges didn't stick. Rebecca's face paled. And now he's free? Olivia nodded. Last known address is in Sacramento, but there's no record of him owning property. He's been moving around. Ethan's fists clenched. So we don't know where he is now. Olivia shook her head. Not yet. A tense silence filled the room. Ethan felt a slow, boiling rage rise inside him. His parents had spent years hiding Rebecca to keep her safe. And now Jacob Wells was out there possibly looking for her. Ethan turned to Rebecca. Did Mom or Dad ever mention him to you, even in passing? Rebecca hesitated. No, not by name, but Mom used to get paranoid sometimes. She'd double-check the locks at night. If a strange number called, she wouldn't answer. I thought she was just being overly cautious. She swallowed. I guess she was protecting me. Ethan's jaw tightened. They shouldn't have had to do this alone. Olivia's phone beeped again. She glanced at the screen, her eyes widening. You're not going to like this. Ethan's heart pounded. What? Olivia turned the phone around, showing them the screen. It was a still image from a traffic camera, blurry, grainy, but unmistakable. A man with graying hair and a lean, hardened face. The timestamp was from yesterday. And the location? Less than 5 miles from the courthouse. Rebecca gasped. He's here. Ethan's blood ran cold. His parents had kept this secret for years, thinking they could outrun the past. But the past had just caught up with them. Ethan's grip on the courthouse table tightened as he stared at the blurry image on Olivia's phone. Jacob Wells. Here. Rebecca's breath hitched beside him. This could just be a coincidence, right? Her voice wavered, but her eyes were wide with fear. Ethan didn't believe in coincidences. Not after everything that had happened. We need to warn my parents, he said, his voice hard. If he's this close, they could be in danger. Olivia was already ahead of him, dialing Margaret Miller's number. She held the phone to her ear, but after a few seconds, her expression darkened. No answer. Ethan's stomach twisted. He pulled out his own phone and called his father. Straight to voicemail. Try the house, Ryan suggested. Ethan dialed the landline. It rang once, twice. Then click. There was no voice, just the faintest sound of static. Ethan felt a chill creep down his spine. Mom? Dad? Silence. Then click. The line went dead. Ethan's blood ran cold. He shot up from his chair. We need to go. Now. Rebecca looked frozen in place. What if he's already there? Ethan's jaw clenched. Then I'll deal with him myself. Ryan grabbed his arm. Wait. You're walking into a situation we don't fully understand. You don't even know if Wells is armed. I don't care, Ethan snapped. This is my family. Olivia cut in. We call the police. Now. She was already dialing 911 as they rushed out of the courthouse. The group ran to Ethan's car, and he peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the pavement. Rebecca sat beside him, gripping the edge of her seat, while Ryan and Olivia were in the back. As they sped toward his parents' house, Ethan's mind raced. His mother had hidden Rebecca for 19 years. His father had lived in fear of this man. And now Jacob Wells was free, and dangerously close. The house, when they pulled into the driveway, Ethan's heart dropped. The front door was slightly ajar. Stay here, he ordered, but Rebecca grabbed his arm. No way. I'm coming. Ethan didn't argue. They needed to be together. Ryan and Olivia followed as they pushed open the door. Inside, the house was eerily silent. Mom, Ethan called, stepping cautiously into the living room. The furniture was undisturbed. No signs of a struggle, but something felt off. Then he heard it, a faint sound. From the kitchen, a chair scraping against the floor. He turned the corner and froze. Jacob Wells stood by the kitchen table, hands resting on the back of a chair. He was older than in the court documents, but his presence was just as menacing. His graying hair was slicked back, and his sharp eyes locked onto Ethan's. Behind him, Margaret and Henry Miller sat stiffly in their chairs, their faces tense. His mother's hand clutched his father's, white-knuckled. Jacob smiled. "Ethan," he said smoothly, "I was wondering when you'd show up." Ethan's entire body tensed. "Get away from them." Jacob raised an eyebrow. Now, no need for hostility. I'm just here to talk." Ethan took a step closer. "You don't talk to my family. You don't look at my family. You don't breathe near my family. You understand me?" Jacob chuckled, shaking his head. "You've got your mother's temper." His gaze flickered to Rebecca. "And there she is, my daughter." Rebecca stiffened. Ethan moved instinctively, stepping in front of her. "She's not your anything." Jacob's expression darkened. "That's where you're wrong. I have every right to see her." Margaret finally spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "You lost that right when you beat me, Jacob. When you put me in the hospital. When you threatened to take her away." Jacob's jaw ticked. "That was a long time ago, Margaret." Margaret's voice rose. "Not long enough." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "You need to leave. Now." Jacob tilted his head. "Or what?" Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged. The impact sent them both crashing into the table, knocking over glass. Jacob grunted as he hit the floor, but Ethan didn't let up. He grabbed the collar of Jacob's shirt and slammed him against the tiles. "You don't touch my family," Ethan roared. Jacob coughed, laughing through the pain. "Guess you really don't know the full story, do you?" Ethan hesitated for half a second, just enough time for Jacob to twist free, shoving Ethan off. He staggered back, reaching into his pocket. "Stop." The front door burst open. 2 police officers rushed inside, weapons drawn. "Hands where we can see them," one of them shouted. Jacob froze, then slowly raised his hands. His lips curled into a smirk. "Guess we'll have to continue this conversation another time." Ethan glared at him, breathing hard as the officers moved in, cuffing Jacob's wrists behind his back. Margaret let out a shaky breath. Rebecca clung to her, tears in her eyes. Ethan took a step back, watching as the man who had haunted his family for years was finally taken away. One of the officers turned to Ethan. "You called just in time. There was already a warrant out for his arrest, violated parole last month. He won't be getting out again anytime soon." Ethan exhaled. He hadn't realized how badly his hands were shaking. It was over. Rebecca looked up at him, eyes filled with emotion. "Thank you." Ethan pulled her into a hug. "You're my sister," he whispered. "No one is ever going to hurt you again." Margaret reached for Ethan's hand. "I'm so sorry we didn't tell you sooner." Ethan squeezed her fingers. "It doesn't matter now. We're safe. You're safe." As the police car pulled away, taking Jacob Wells with it, Ethan finally felt the weight that had been pressing on him for months start to lift. For the first time in a long time, his family wasn't hiding anymore. They were finally free. As the police car disappeared down the street, Ethan stood with his family, finally free from the shadows of the past. What started as a battle in court over money had unraveled into something far deeper, a story of hidden truths, betrayal, and ultimately redemption. Through all the twists and turns, Ethan had gained something far more valuable than money. He had found his sister. He had uncovered the sacrifices his parents made. And he had taken back control of a truth that had been buried for nearly 2 decades. But this is just one story. Now, we want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this roller coaster of emotions, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories filled with mystery, drama, and unexpected twists. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that keeps you on the edge of your seat. See you in the next one.